Detective Sarah Martinez thought she was just another scared witness, another victim too fragile to handle real questioning. By midnight, 3 federal marshals would be dead, a cartel safe house would be in flames, and Sarah would discover that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who appear the most vulnerable. Creating this story took careful research and countless hours of development. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in interview room C cast harsh shadows across Detective Lisa Chen's weathered face as she studied the woman sitting across the metal table. The witness appeared fragile, almost ethereal, with auburn hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets she wasn't ready to share. Her name was allegedly Rebecca Thompson, and according to the initial report, she had been present during a brutal triple homicide at the Riverside Warehouse District 3 nights earlier. Detective Chen had seen hundreds of witnesses over her 15-year career with the Portland Police Bureau, and Rebecca Thompson fit a familiar pattern. She was the type of person who seemed to shrink into herself when faced with authority, who spoke in whispers and avoided direct eye contact. Her clothing was modest and unremarkable, a simple gray sweater and dark jeans that suggested someone trying to blend into the background rather than stand out. Everything about her screamed ordinary citizen caught in extraordinary circumstances. The case file spread across Chen's desk painted a grim picture. 3 bodies had been discovered in an abandoned warehouse, all showing signs of professional execution-style killings. The victims were known associates of the Mendoza crime family, a ruthless organization that had been expanding their operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Intelligence suggested the killings were the result of a territorial dispute with a rival faction, but concrete evidence remained elusive. Rebecca Thompson claimed to have been walking her dog in the area when she heard gunshots and saw several men fleeing the scene. Her statement was consistent but vague, lacking the specific details that would make it useful for building a prosecution case. She described hearing voices speaking in Spanish, seeing dark-colored vehicles, and witnessing what appeared to be an organized retreat rather than panicked flight. The details were accurate enough to confirm her presence at the scene, but generic enough to suggest she was holding back significant information. Detective Chen's partner, Detective Michael Rodriguez, had interviewed Rebecca twice during the previous 48 hours. His assessment was straightforward and dismissive. She was a civilian who had stumbled into a dangerous situation, someone whose sheltered life had left her unprepared to deal with the realities of criminal violence. Rodriguez believed Rebecca was simply too frightened to provide detailed testimony, her memory fragmented by trauma and her cooperation limited by fear of retaliation. The precinct's general consensus supported Rodriguez's evaluation. Rebecca Thompson appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, an unfortunate bystander whose proximity to violence had made her a reluctant participant in a complex criminal investigation. Her background check revealed a quiet life working as a freelance graphic designer, paying taxes, maintaining a clean driving record, and participating in local community organizations. Nothing in her documented history suggested any connection to criminal activity or familiarity with the violent world she had allegedly witnessed. Captain James Morrison had assigned Chen to conduct a final interview before releasing Rebecca from protective custody and placing her in the Witness Protection Program. The department's resources were stretched thin, and keeping civilians under protection required significant manpower that could be better utilized pursuing active leads. Morrison's instructions were clear: complete the interview, document her statement, and process the paperwork necessary to transfer her to Federal Protection Services. Chen approached the interview with professional skepticism that had been honed through years of dealing with witnesses who provided incomplete or misleading information. She understood that civilians often withheld details not from deliberate deception, but from genuine confusion about what information might be relevant or fear about potential consequences of their cooperation. Her job was to create an environment where Rebecca would feel safe enough to share whatever additional details she might possess. The interview room was deliberately designed to be non-threatening, with comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and neutral colors that contrasted sharply with the harsh interrogation environments used for suspected criminals. Chen had arranged for coffee and water to be available, and she spoke in measured tones that conveyed authority without intimidation. Her approach was methodical and patient, designed to gradually build rapport and encourage comprehensive disclosure. Rebecca's initial responses followed the same pattern established during her previous interviews. She spoke quietly, often pausing to consider her words carefully before responding to questions. Her body language suggested anxiety and discomfort, but not the specific fear patterns that Chen associated with witnesses who were actively hiding information. She appeared genuinely traumatized by what she had experienced, her emotional responses consistent with someone processing a shocking encounter with violence. Chen began with routine background questions designed to establish Rebecca's credibility and identify any inconsistencies in her documented history. Rebecca answered clearly and directly, providing details about her work, her residential history, and her daily routines that aligned with the information gathered during the background investigation. Her responses revealed a methodical mind that paid attention to details, but also suggested someone who lived a deliberately quiet life with minimal social connections. The conversation shifted to the events of 3 nights earlier, and Chen observed subtle changes in Rebecca's demeanor. Her responses became more measured, her pauses longer, and her eye contact less frequent. These changes could indicate deception, but they were equally consistent with someone reliving traumatic memories and struggling to maintain emotional control while recounting disturbing experiences. Rebecca described her evening walk through the warehouse district with mechanical precision, detailing her route, the weather conditions, and the general atmosphere of the area. Her account included specific details about timing and location that demonstrated careful observation skills, but lacked the emotional context that typically accompanied traumatic memory recall. Chen noted the clinical nature of Rebecca's narrative, wondering whether it reflected genuine detachment or careful preparation. The description of the actual incident remained frustratingly vague, despite Chen's persistent questioning. Rebecca insisted that her view had been partially obstructed by parked vehicles and industrial equipment, limiting her ability to identify specific individuals or provide detailed descriptions of their activities. She described hearing multiple gunshots in rapid succession, followed by shouting in Spanish and the sound of vehicles departing at high speed. Chen pressed for additional details about the voices Rebecca claimed to have heard, asking about accents, specific phrases, or emotional tones that might provide insight into the perpetrators' identities or motivations. Rebecca's responses were disappointingly generic, describing general agitation and urgency without the specific characteristics that would distinguish these particular criminals from any other group involved in violent activity. The detective's frustration grew as the interview progressed without yielding new information that would advance the investigation. Rebecca appeared cooperative and sincere, but her testimony lacked the specificity needed to identify suspects or establish connections to known criminal organizations. Chen began considering the possibility that Rebecca's proximity to the crime scene had been purely coincidental, that she was simply an innocent civilian whose unfortunate timing had made her a witness to events she couldn't fully comprehend. Chen's assessment of Rebecca was complicated by subtle inconsistencies that suggested more complexity than initially apparent. Rebecca's vocabulary occasionally included terminology that seemed inconsistent with her claimed background in graphic design. She demonstrated familiarity with concepts related to surveillance, tactical movement, and criminal organization that exceeded the knowledge typically possessed by civilians. even those who consumed crime-related entertainment media. More puzzling were Rebecca's physical responses to certain questions and environmental stimuli. Chen noticed that Rebecca automatically positioned herself to maintain visual contact with both the interview room door and the observation window, a behavior pattern more consistent with security-conscious individuals than traumatized civilians. Her posture and movement patterns suggested someone accustomed to maintaining situational awareness rather than someone overwhelmed by unfamiliar circumstances. Rebecca's clothing choices also struck Chen as unusual for someone seeking to appear inconspicuous. While her outfit was superficially unremarkable, the specific brands and construction quality suggested significantly higher income than would be typical for a freelance graphic designer. Her accessories were minimal but expensive, chosen with an eye for functionality rather than fashion. Even her hairstyle, while appearing natural and unstudied, showed evidence of professional maintenance that would be costly to maintain regularly. The detective's growing suspicions were reinforced by Rebecca's responses to questions about her personal relationships and social connections. Her answers revealed a surprisingly isolated lifestyle for someone living in an urban environment, with minimal family contact and few close friendships. While such isolation wasn't inherently suspicious, it was unusual for someone who claimed to be actively involved in community organizations and local business networks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Chen decided to test Rebecca's reactions by introducing more aggressive questioning techniques, shifting from supportive inquiry to direct challenge regarding potential inconsistencies in her account. Rebecca's response to this tactical change was immediate and revealing. Instead of showing increased anxiety or confusion, she became more controlled and alert, her posture straightening and her focus sharpening in ways that suggested training or experience with adversarial questioning. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to someone with Chen's experience in criminal interrogation. Rebecca's breathing pattern changed from the shallow, irregular rhythm of anxiety to the controlled, measured breathing associated with stress management techniques. Her eye contact became more direct and sustained, and her verbal responses showed increased precision and economy of language. These were not the reactions of a frightened civilian, but of someone shifting into a more defensive operational mindset. Chen's suspicions crystallized around Rebecca's claim about walking her dog during the incident. Throughout multiple interviews, Rebecca had consistently referenced her pet as the reason for her presence in the warehouse district, but she had never provided specific details about the animal's breed, size, or behavior during the traumatic events. When pressed for these details, Rebecca's responses were vague and inconsistent, suggesting that the dog might be a fabricated element in her cover story. The detective decided to pursue this inconsistency more aggressively, asking Rebecca to describe her dog's reaction to the gunshots and whether the animal had shown signs of distress or fear during the incident. Rebecca's hesitation before responding was brief but noticeable, and her subsequent description lacked the emotional investment typical of pet owners discussing their animals under stressful circumstances. Chen expanded her questioning to include details about Rebecca's daily routine with her pet, asking about veterinary care, feeding schedules, and exercise patterns. Rebecca's answers were technically accurate, but emotionally flat, lacking the spontaneous details and personal anecdotes that genuine pet owners typically shared when discussing their animals. The responses suggested someone who had researched appropriate answers rather than someone drawing from personal experience. The realization that Rebecca might be operating under a false identity transformed Chen's approach to the interview. Instead of treating her as a traumatized witness who needed encouragement and support, Chen began evaluating her as a potential subject with undisclosed connections to the criminal investigation. This shift in perspective revealed additional inconsistencies and behavioral patterns that had previously seemed inconsequential. Rebecca's knowledge of the warehouse district exceeded what would be expected from someone who occasionally walked through the area. Her descriptions of building layouts, security arrangements, and typical activity patterns suggested someone who had conducted systematic reconnaissance rather than casual observation. She demonstrated familiarity with sight lines, escape routes, and concealment opportunities that would be relevant for criminal activity or law enforcement operations. The detective's growing suspicions led her to request additional background information about Rebecca Thompson from federal databases that hadn't been consulted during the initial investigation. The queries revealed gaps and inconsistencies in Rebecca's documented history that raised serious questions about her true identity and background. Her financial records showed income sources that didn't align with her claimed profession, and her residential history included addresses in locations known for housing individuals in various forms of protective custody. Chen realized that she might be dealing with someone operating under federal protection, possibly someone whose true identity had been concealed to protect them from criminal retaliation. This possibility explained many of the inconsistencies in Rebecca's behavior and background, but it also complicated the investigation significantly. If Rebecca was indeed under federal protection, her presence at the crime scene might not be coincidental, and her reluctance to provide detailed testimony might reflect legitimate security concerns rather than simple fear or trauma. The detectives' recognition of Rebecca's potential protected status created a complex tactical situation. Federal witness protection operations were highly classified, and unauthorized disclosure of protected identities could compromise ongoing investigations and endanger lives. Chen needed to determine Rebecca's true status without violating federal protocols or alerting criminal organizations to the presence of a protected witness in their area of operations. Chen decided to approach the situation indirectly, asking Rebecca about her long-term plans and whether she had concerns about remaining in the Portland area given her connection to the warehouse incident. Rebecca's response revealed careful consideration of security implications and demonstrated familiarity with relocation procedures that exceeded what would be typical for ordinary civilians. Her questions about police protection and federal assistance suggested someone who understood the complexities of witness security programs. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the interview room door, followed by the entrance of Agent David Martinez from the FBI's Portland field office. Agent Martinez's presence hadn't been requested by the Portland Police Bureau, and his arrival suggested that federal authorities had been monitoring the interview process. Chen recognized Martinez from previous joint operations, and his serious expression indicated that the situation was more complex than the local investigation had revealed. Martinez's interaction with Rebecca was notably different from Chen's approach. He addressed her with professional courtesy that suggested prior acquaintance, and his questions focused on her immediate security needs rather than details about the warehouse incident. Rebecca's response to Martinez was equally revealing, showing a level of comfort and familiarity that contradicted her claimed status as an ordinary civilian witness. The federal agent's presence transformed the interview dynamic completely. Chen realized that her suspicions about Rebecca's protected status were correct, and that the warehouse incident might be connected to larger federal investigations involving organized crime networks. Martinez's arrival suggested that Rebecca's safety had been compromised, and that her cover identity might no longer provide adequate protection against criminal retaliation. Agent Martinez requested a private conference with Detective Chen, leaving Rebecca alone in the interview room under the supervision of uniformed officers. During their discussion, Martinez confirmed that Rebecca was indeed operating under federal protection, but he couldn't provide specific details about her background or the circumstances that had led to her protected status. He emphasized that her safety depended on maintaining the integrity of her cover identity and limiting disclosure of information that could compromise her security. The federal agent explained that Rebecca's presence at the warehouse incident had been genuinely coincidental, but that her familiarity with criminal activity had allowed her to observe details that ordinary witnesses might have missed. Her reluctance to provide comprehensive testimony reflected legitimate security concerns about exposing her investigative capabilities and drawing attention to her protected status. Martinez indicated that federal authorities were prepared to work with local law enforcement to gather intelligence about the warehouse killings while protecting Rebecca's identity and safety. Chen returned to the interview room with a completely different understanding of her subject and the investigation's broader implications. Rebecca's apparent vulnerability and emotional fragility were revealed as carefully constructed elements of a protective persona designed to conceal her true capabilities and background. The detective realized that she had been evaluating someone whose training and experience likely exceeded her own, someone who had been maintaining a complex deception while providing just enough cooperation to appear helpful without compromising her security. The revelation forced Chen to reconsider every aspect of Rebecca's behavior and statements. Details that had seemed like inconsistencies or signs of trauma were now revealed as evidence of professional training and operational security consciousness. Rebecca's careful word choices, her situational awareness, and her controlled emotional responses reflected someone accustomed to operating under false identities in dangerous circumstances. Chen's final questions focused on Rebecca's immediate security needs and her ability to continue operating under her current cover identity. Rebecca's responses revealed the strain of maintaining her protective persona while dealing with the stress of potential exposure. She acknowledged that her presence at the warehouse incident had created complications for her security situation, but insisted that she could continue to operate effectively if proper protective measures were implemented. The interview concluded with arrangements for Rebecca's continued protection under federal supervision, with Detective Chen providing local law enforcement support as needed. The case files would be modified to protect Rebecca's true identity, while preserving the intelligence value of her observations. Chen realized that she had encountered someone whose apparent weakness concealed extraordinary strength, whose vulnerability masked dangerous capabilities, and whose cooperation came at significant personal risk. Agent Martinez's final briefing revealed the broader context of Rebecca's situation without compromising specific operational details. The warehouse killings were connected to an ongoing federal investigation into organized crime networks that threatened national security interests. Rebecca's protected status reflected her value as a source of intelligence about these networks, and her safety was considered essential to the success of multiple federal operations. The detective's understanding of witness protection programs was fundamentally altered by her encounter with Rebecca. She had assumed that protected witnesses were primarily victims seeking safety from criminal retaliation, but Rebecca represented a different category entirely. She was an active participant in federal law enforcement operations, someone whose protected status allowed her to operate in environments where conventional investigators would be compromised or ineffective. Chen's final report emphasized Rebecca's cooperation and the intelligence value of her observations, while carefully concealing any information that might compromise her protected status. The detective had learned that effective law enforcement sometimes required accepting incomplete information from sources whose full capabilities couldn't be disclosed. Rebecca's apparent fragility had concealed strength that would continue to serve federal investigations long after the warehouse incident was resolved. The case remained officially open, but Chen understood that the investigation's most significant developments would occur beyond her jurisdiction and visibility. Rebecca would continue her protected existence, maintaining her carefully constructed identity while providing intelligence that supported federal operations against organized crime networks. The detective had glimpsed a hidden world where apparent weakness served as perfect camouflage for extraordinary capabilities. Detective Chen returned to her regular caseload with a deeper appreciation for the complexity of modern law enforcement and the sacrifices made by individuals who operated in the shadows to protect national security interests. Rebecca Thompson would fade back into her constructed life, her true identity and capabilities known only to a select few federal agents who understood that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who appear most vulnerable. The warehouse investigation would continue through traditional channels, but its most valuable intelligence had already been gathered by someone whose presence at the crime scene appeared coincidental, but whose observations were informed by training and experience that exceeded most law enforcement professionals. Chen had encountered someone who embodied the principle that effective deception required hiding strength behind apparent weakness, and that sometimes the most important victories were those that remained forever secret. Agent Martinez's departure marked the end of Detective Chen's direct involvement with Rebecca's case, but the encounter had provided insights that would influence her approach to future investigations. She had learned to look beyond surface appearances and consider the possibility that witnesses might possess capabilities and backgrounds that weren't immediately apparent. The experience had demonstrated that effective law enforcement required acknowledging the limitations of local jurisdiction while supporting federal operations that addressed threats beyond individual communities. Rebecca's story represented thousands of similar cases across the country, where federal authorities maintained protected witnesses whose true identities and capabilities remained classified indefinitely. These individuals operated in plain sight, their apparent ordinariness serving as perfect cover for extraordinary service to law enforcement and national security interests. Their sacrifices included not only physical danger, but the psychological burden of maintaining false identities while separated from their authentic lives and relationships. Detective Chen filed her final report on the Rebecca Thompson interview with the understanding that she had participated in something larger than a local criminal investigation. The warehouse killings were part of a complex web of organized crime activity that threatened communities across multiple states, and Rebecca's intelligence contribution would support federal efforts to dismantle these networks. The detective's role had been to provide professional assessment and local support, while protecting information that could compromise ongoing federal operations. The interview room where Chen had questioned Rebecca returned to routine use for local investigations, but the detective would remember the encounter as a reminder that modern law enforcement operated in layers of complexity that weren't always visible to individual officers. Federal witness protection programs represented just one element of a comprehensive approach to combating organized crime that required coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions. Chen's subsequent cases were informed by her experience with Rebecca, leading her to consider alternative explanations for witness behavior and to recognize signs that might indicate federal involvement in local investigations. She developed greater appreciation for the careful balance required between local law enforcement needs and federal operational security, understanding that effective cooperation sometimes meant accepting incomplete information and limited jurisdiction. The Portland Police Bureau's involvement in the warehouse investigation continued through traditional channels, but the most significant intelligence developments occurred beyond Detective Chen's visibility and jurisdiction. Federal authorities used Rebecca's observations to advance their understanding of organized crime networks while protecting her identity and maintaining her operational effectiveness. The success of these efforts would never be publicly acknowledged, but their impact would be measured in prevented crimes and disrupted criminal organizations. Rebecca Thompson's cover identity remained intact, allowing her to continue providing intelligence services while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary civilian traumatized by her proximity to violence. Her performance during the police interviews had been flawless, convincing experienced investigators that she was simply another frightened witness rather than a federal asset with extraordinary capabilities. The deception's success demonstrated the effectiveness of federal witness protection programs when properly implemented and maintained. Detective Chen's final assessment of the Rebecca Thompson case emphasized the importance of federal-local cooperation in addressing complex criminal investigations that cross jurisdictional boundaries. Her encounter with Rebecca had revealed the hidden infrastructure that supported federal law enforcement operations while protecting the individuals who risked their lives to gather intelligence in dangerous environments. The detective understood that her limited role in this larger operation was essential to its overall success. The warehouse district returned to its normal patterns of industrial activity, with no visible indication that it had been the site of federal intelligence operations that would influence law enforcement efforts across multiple states. Rebecca's presence in the area would be remembered by local investigators as coincidental, while federal authorities continued to benefit from intelligence that would inform their understanding of organized crime networks for years to come. Chen's career continued with enhanced appreciation for the complexity of modern criminal investigations and the importance of supporting federal operations, even when local officers couldn't be provided with complete information about their broader significance. The detective had learned that effective law enforcement sometimes required accepting ambiguity and trusting that individual contributions served larger purposes that weren't immediately visible or comprehensible. Rebecca's story represented the hidden sacrifices made by thousands of federal assets who operated under false identities while gathering intelligence that protected national security interests. Their effectiveness depended on maintaining cover identities that concealed their true capabilities, creating situations where they appeared vulnerable while possessing extraordinary strength and training. These individuals embodied the principle that the most effective deception involved hiding strength behind apparent weakness. The investigation files related to Rebecca Thompson were classified and sealed, protecting information that could compromise ongoing federal operations while preserving intelligence that would inform future law enforcement efforts. Detective Chen's encounter with Rebecca became part of her professional experience without generating official documentation that might threaten operational security or reveal protected identities. Years later, Chen would occasionally wonder about Rebecca's continued activities and whether her federal service had concluded successfully. The detective understood that such questions would never be answered, and that Rebecca's safety depended on maintaining the anonymity that had allowed her to operate effectively in dangerous environments. The encounter had provided Chen with lasting appreciation for the individuals who sacrificed their authentic identities to serve law enforcement and national security interests. The warehouse incident investigation was eventually closed through traditional channels, with suspects identified through conventional investigative techniques that didn't rely on Rebecca's protected testimony. Federal authorities used the intelligence she had provided to advance their broader investigation into organized crime networks, but these developments occurred beyond the visibility of local law enforcement agencies that had supported the initial response. Detective Chen's experience with Rebecca Thompson became a defining moment in her career, demonstrating the importance of supporting federal operations while maintaining professional discretion about information that couldn't be fully disclosed. The encounter had revealed layers of complexity in modern law enforcement that required cooperation between multiple agencies and acceptance of operational limitations by individual officers. Rebecca continued her protected existence, her true identity and capabilities known only to select federal agents who understood the value of her intelligence contributions and the risks she accepted to provide them. Her apparent vulnerability remained perfect, camouflage for extraordinary capabilities that served federal law enforcement interests while protecting her from criminal retaliation and maintaining her operational effectiveness in dangerous environments. The emergency alert came through Detective Chen's radio at 11:47 p.m., shattering the quiet routine of the night shift with urgent transmission codes that indicated officer-involved shooting and multiple casualties. Chen was reviewing case files in her cubicle when the dispatcher's voice crackled through the communication system, reporting gunfire at 1247 Riverside Avenue, the same warehouse district where Rebecca Thompson claimed to have witnessed the triple homicide 3 days earlier. Chen's immediate response was complicated by recognition that the address fell within the security perimeter that federal authorities had established around Rebecca's safe house location. Agent Martinez had briefed her on the protective arrangements, without providing specific addresses, but the proximity of the incident to Rebecca's secured area created immediate concerns about potential compromise of her protected status and safety. The detectives' drive through the warehouse district revealed emergency vehicles positioned throughout the area, their flashing lights creating chaotic patterns of red and blue illumination that transformed familiar industrial landscape into something resembling a combat zone. Police barriers had been established at multiple intersections, creating a secure perimeter that extended far beyond typical crime scene protocols and suggested federal involvement in the response coordination. Chen arrived at the primary incident location to discover a scene that defied explanation through conventional criminal activity. 2 Portland police patrol units had been destroyed by what appeared to be military-grade explosive devices, their twisted metal frames and scattered debris indicating sophisticated demolition work rather than improvised criminal sabotage. 3 federal vehicles were positioned nearby, their occupants engaged in intensive communication activities that suggested coordination with agencies beyond local law enforcement. Agent Martinez approached Chen as she surveyed the destruction, his expression grave and his movements suggesting someone operating under extreme time pressure. The federal agent's briefing was delivered in terse, professional language that conveyed urgent information while avoiding details that might compromise operational security or exceed Chen's clearance level for classified information. The situation had deteriorated rapidly during the previous 2 hours, Martinez explained, beginning with intelligence indicating that Rebecca's protected status had been compromised through unknown channels. Criminal organizations with connections to the warehouse killings had apparently identified her true significance to federal investigations and were mounting coordinated efforts to eliminate her before she could provide additional testimony or intelligence. Rebecca had been moved from her initial safe house to a secondary location when surveillance detected suspicious activity in the surrounding area. The relocation had proceeded according to established protocols, but the convoy transporting her had been ambushed by heavily armed personnel using tactics and equipment that exceeded typical criminal capabilities. The ambush had been executed with precision that suggested military training and access to intelligence about federal protective procedures. 2 federal marshals had been killed during the initial attack, Martinez reported, along with 1 Portland police officer who had responded to calls for assistance. Rebecca's status was unknown, with communications lost during the engagement and her protective details scattered or eliminated. The criminal organization responsible for the attack had demonstrated capabilities that threatened not only Rebecca's safety, but the integrity of federal witness protection operations throughout the region. Chen's role in the developing crisis was complicated by her limited knowledge of Rebecca's true background and the federal operations she supported. Martinez could provide only essential information needed for immediate tactical coordination, emphasizing that Rebecca's survival was critical to multiple ongoing investigations and national security interests that extended far beyond the local warehouse incident. The detective's understanding of the situation was further complicated by evidence suggesting that the criminal organization responsible for the attack possessed detailed information about federal protective procedures and personnel assignments. The ambush had been positioned to exploit specific vulnerabilities in standard transportation protocols, indicating either extensive surveillance capabilities or access to classified information through compromised sources. Martinez assembled a joint task force combining federal agents, Portland police detectives, and specialized tactical units to coordinate search and rescue operations, while addressing the security threats that had compromised Rebecca's protection. Chen was assigned to lead the local law enforcement component of the operation, coordinating with federal authorities while maintaining jurisdiction over Portland police resources and personnel. The search area encompassed several square miles of industrial and residential terrain that provided numerous concealment opportunities for both Rebecca and her pursuers. Intelligence indicated that the criminal organization had deployed multiple teams throughout the area, using sophisticated communication equipment and tactical coordination to maintain pressure on federal forces while systematically eliminating potential hiding places where Rebecca might seek shelter. Chen's tactical assessment of the situation revealed that Rebecca's survival depended not only on evading immediate pursuit, but on reaching secure locations where federal authorities could re-establish protective custody and coordinate extraction procedures. The criminal organization's resources and capabilities suggested that conventional hiding places would provide only temporary security, requiring Rebecca to utilize skills and knowledge that exceeded typical civilian capabilities. The detective's first significant discovery came through analysis of the ambush site, where forensic evidence revealed tactical patterns that indicated Rebecca had not been passively transported during the attack, but had actively participated in defensive measures. Shell casings and impact patterns suggested that she had engaged hostile forces with precision and effectiveness that contradicted her apparent civilian status and training. Blood analysis from the ambush site revealed that Rebecca had been wounded during the engagement, but not seriously enough to prevent her continued movement and defensive activities. The trail evidence suggested that she had separated from her protective detail, deliberately rather than accidentally, possibly to draw pursuit away from surviving federal personnel, or to utilize escape routes that wouldn't accommodate larger groups. Chen's tracking of Rebecca's movement patterns revealed tactical sophistication that exceeded anything suggested by her cover identity or previous behavior. During police interviews, her route selection demonstrated intimate knowledge of the warehouse district's layout, including access points, concealment opportunities, and escape routes that weren't apparent to casual observers or even experienced law enforcement personnel. The detective realized that Rebecca's earlier presence in the warehouse district during the triple homicide had not been coincidental, but represented systematic reconnaissance activities that were part of her federal intelligence responsibilities. Her familiarity with the area's geography and activity patterns reflected extended surveillance operations rather than casual observation during routine activities. Chen's coordination with federal tactical teams revealed additional complications in the developing crisis. Intelligence intercepts indicated that the criminal organization was receiving real-time updates about law enforcement response activities, suggesting either sophisticated surveillance capabilities or continued access to classified communications channels. The security breach that had compromised Rebecca's protected status appeared to be ongoing and systematic rather than isolated. Agent Martinez's briefings became increasingly urgent as the search progressed without locating Rebecca or establishing communication with her protective detail. Federal authorities were operating under the assumption that she remained alive and mobile, but their ability to provide assistance was limited by the criminal organization's tactical capabilities and apparent access to law enforcement operational information. The detective's investigation of the security breach focused on identifying how criminal organizations had obtained detailed information about federal witness protection procedures and personnel assignments. The sophistication of the ambush suggested access to classified briefing materials, communication intercepts, or personnel files that would normally be available only to authorized federal agents and supervisors. Chen's analysis of recent intelligence sharing activities revealed several potential sources for the security compromise, including contractor personnel, administrative staff, and law enforcement personnel who had participated in joint operations involving Rebecca's case. The investigation required careful coordination with federal internal security specialists, while maintaining operational focus on locating and protecting Rebecca from immediate threats. The search operation expanded to include residential areas adjacent to the Warehouse District, where intelligence suggested Rebecca might seek temporary shelter while attempting to re-establish contact with federal authorities. Chen coordinated door-to-door searches while maintaining awareness that Rebecca's training and operational experience might lead her to avoid conventional hiding places in favor of locations that provided tactical advantages for continued defensive operations. The detective's understanding of Rebecca's capabilities was transformed by evidence gathered during the expanded search operations. Witness reports described a woman matching Rebecca's description, engaging hostile forces with professional competence. That included tactical movement, precision shooting, and combat coordination that exceeded typical law enforcement training. These accounts revealed that Rebecca's apparent vulnerability during police interviews had concealed extraordinary combat capabilities and operational experience. Chen realized that Rebecca's protected status reflected not only her value as an intelligence source, but her active participation in federal law enforcement operations that required combat skills and tactical training. Her cover identity as a traumatized civilian witness had been necessary to conceal capabilities that would compromise her effectiveness in undercover operations and endanger her life if known to criminal organizations. The tactical situation deteriorated further when communications intercepts revealed that the criminal organization was coordinating with additional personnel who were being deployed to expand the search area and eliminate federal law enforcement personnel involved in Rebecca's protection. The threat had evolved from a targeted elimination operation into a broader assault on federal authority and witness protection integrity. Agent Martinez's coordination of federal response resources included deployment of specialized tactical units, electronic surveillance capabilities, and intelligence assets that represented significant escalation in the federal commitment to Rebecca's protection. The resources being deployed suggested that her intelligence value and operational importance exceeded what had been apparent during Chen's initial interviews. The detective's role expanded to include coordination with regional law enforcement, agencies whose jurisdiction encompassed potential escape routes and safe house locations that Rebecca might attempt to reach. The multi-agency response reflected recognition that the crisis threatened federal law enforcement capabilities beyond the immediate threat to Rebecca's personal safety. Chen's analysis of tactical communications revealed that Rebecca was not simply evading pursuit, but was actively engaging hostile forces in ways that disrupted their coordination and reduced their operational effectiveness. Her actions suggested someone with extensive combat experience, who was using urban terrain and available resources to conduct systematic defensive operations against superior numbers and resources. The detective's growing appreciation for Rebecca's capabilities was reinforced by forensic evidence from multiple engagement sites, where ballistic analysis revealed precision, shooting, and tactical movement that indicated professional military or law enforcement training. Rebecca was not merely surviving the criminal organization's elimination attempts, but was systematically degrading their operational capabilities while protecting federal personnel and civilians in the area. Agent Martinez's updates on federal tactical coordination revealed that Rebecca's defensive activities were providing opportunities for federal forces to identify and engage criminal organization personnel who had been operating with apparent impunity. Her combat effectiveness was not only preserving her own safety, but was contributing to broader law enforcement efforts to neutralize threats to federal operations and protected witness programs. Chen's coordination of local law enforcement Support included establishing secure communication channels that would allow Rebecca to contact friendly forces if she could access appropriate equipment. The detective understood that Rebecca's survival depended on her ability to distinguish between legitimate law enforcement personnel and criminal organization members who might be using captured equipment or false credentials. The search operation's complexity increased when intelligence indicated that criminal organization personnel were using Portland police uniforms and equipment that had been obtained through unknown channels. The security breach extended beyond federal witness protection programs to include compromise of local law enforcement resources and procedures, creating additional threats to both Rebecca's safety and general public security. Detective Chen's tactical assessment revealed that the criminal organization possessed resources and capabilities that exceeded typical organized crime activities, suggesting coordination with larger criminal networks or hostile intelligence services that had interests in disrupting federal law enforcement operations. The attack on Rebecca's protective detail represented broader threats to national security interests that extended far beyond local criminal activity. The detective's investigation of the security breach revealed systematic compromise of federal and local law enforcement communications, personnel information, and tactical procedures that had been exploited to plan and execute the ambush operation. The scope of the compromise suggested long-term penetration activities rather than opportunistic intelligence gathering, indicating sophisticated hostile operations that threatened multiple federal investigations and protected witness programs. Chen's coordination with federal internal security specialists revealed that Rebecca's case was part of broader counterintelligence operations involving hostile penetration of federal law enforcement agencies. Her protected status and intelligence contributions had made her a high-value target for elimination by criminal organizations seeking to prevent federal prosecution of their activities and disrupt ongoing investigations. The detective's understanding of Rebecca's situation was further complicated by intelligence indicating that her federal service involved active participation in counterintelligence operations that had exposed hostile penetration of federal agencies. Her apparent vulnerability during police interviews had concealed not only combat capabilities, but operational knowledge that posed existential threats to criminal organizations and hostile intelligence services. Agent Martinez's briefings revealed that Rebecca's intelligence contributions had supported federal operations against organized crime networks with connections to international terrorism and hostile nation-state activities. Her elimination would compromise multiple ongoing investigations, while sending messages to other federal assets about the risks of cooperation with law enforcement authorities. Chen's tactical coordination focused on creating opportunities for Rebecca to reach secure locations where federal authorities could reestablish protective custody and coordinate extraction procedures. The detective understood that Rebecca's survival depended on her ability to continue evading superior forces while federal tactical units systematically eliminated threats and secured escape routes. The search operation revealed additional evidence of Rebecca's combat effectiveness, including disabled vehicles and eliminated hostile personnel that demonstrated precision and tactical sophistication, exceeding typical law enforcement training. Her defensive activities were systematically disrupting criminal organization operations while protecting federal personnel and civilian populations in the engagement area. Detective Chen's analysis of engagement patterns revealed that Rebecca was conducting coordinated defensive operations rather than random evasion activities. Her tactical choices suggested someone with extensive military or special operations training who was using available resources and terrain features to conduct systematic operations against hostile forces while maintaining mobility and defensive capabilities. The detective's coordination with federal tactical specialists revealed that Rebecca's military background had been concealed as part of her protected status, but her combat experience was now proving essential to her survival and the success of federal law enforcement operations. Her apparent civilian identity had provided perfect cover for someone whose true capabilities exceeded most federal agents and local law enforcement personnel. Agent Martinez's tactical updates revealed that Rebecca was systematically eliminating criminal organization personnel while moving toward extraction points where federal forces could provide support and coordination. Her combat effectiveness was not only ensuring her personal survival, but was contributing to broader federal efforts to neutralize threats to witness protection programs and ongoing investigations. Chen's understanding of the crisis was transformed by recognition that Rebecca represented a new category of federal asset whose protected status concealed active military service and intelligence operations that served national security interests beyond conventional law enforcement activities. Her apparent vulnerability had been necessary deception to maintain operational effectiveness while gathering intelligence in dangerous environments. The detectives' coordination of local law enforcement support included establishing secure perimeters that would prevent criminal organization reinforcements from reaching the engagement area, while providing tactical advantages for federal extraction operations. Chen understood that the success of these efforts would determine not only Rebecca's survival, but the integrity of federal witness protection programs and ongoing counterintelligence operations. The tactical situation evolved rapidly as federal forces established contact with Rebecca and began coordinating extraction procedures, while continuing to engage hostile forces that were attempting to prevent her escape. The detective's role expanded to include coordination of multi-agency response efforts that would ensure Rebecca's safety while preserving the operational security needed for her continued federal service. Agent Martinez's final tactical briefing revealed that Rebecca's survival and successful extraction would preserve federal capabilities that were essential to ongoing operations against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services. Her combat effectiveness during the crisis had demonstrated that apparent vulnerability could conceal extraordinary strength when properly utilized, and that effective deception required hiding capabilities behind carefully constructed personas that served operational security needs. Detective Chen's participation in the crisis had revealed layers of federal law enforcement operations that extended far beyond local criminal investigations, demonstrating the importance of supporting federal activities while maintaining professional discretion about information that couldn't be fully disclosed. The encounter had shown that modern law enforcement required coordination between multiple agencies and acceptance of operational limitations by individual officers who served larger purposes that weren't immediately visible or comprehensible. The warehouse district would return to normal industrial activities, but the crisis had revealed hidden infrastructure that supported federal operations while protecting individuals who risked their lives to gather intelligence in dangerous environments. Rebecca's apparent fragility had concealed strength that continued to serve federal investigations, demonstrating that sometimes the most dangerous people were those who appeared most vulnerable, and that effective service required sacrificing authentic identity to maintain operational effectiveness in hostile environments. The explosion that shattered the windows of the abandoned textile factory sent shockwaves through the surrounding blocks, its thunderous roar echoing off concrete walls and steel structures as debris rained down on Detective Chen's position behind an overturned delivery truck. The blast originated from the criminal organization's command vehicle, which had been positioned to coordinate their elimination efforts against Rebecca Thompson, but was now reduced to burning wreckage that illuminated the warehouse district in flickering orange light. Chen pressed herself against the truck's chassis as secondary explosions erupted from ammunition stores inside the destroyed vehicle, their rapid-fire detonations creating a deadly shower of hot metal fragments that peppered the surrounding area with lethal projectiles. Through the chaos and smoke, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions where criminal organization Personnel were engaging an unseen opponent with desperate intensity that suggested their tactical situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. Agent Martinez's voice crackled through Chen's tactical radio, reporting that federal surveillance assets had identified Rebecca's position, approximately 200 meters from the detective's location. The federal agent's transmission was interrupted by sustained automatic weapons fire that echoed through the industrial landscape, followed by an explosion that sent another column of smoke rising into the night sky above the warehouse district. The tactical situation had evolved far beyond the search and rescue operation that Chen had been coordinating during the previous 6 hours. Rebecca Thompson was no longer evading pursuit or seeking extraction assistance from federal authorities. She had transitioned to active offensive operations against the criminal organization that had compromised her protected status, systematically eliminating their personnel and destroying their equipment with precision that demonstrated extraordinary combat capabilities. Chen's observation of the engagement revealed tactical movements and combat techniques that exceeded anything in her experience with local law enforcement or federal agents. Rebecca was conducting coordinated assault operations that utilized available cover, concealment, and improvised weapons with efficiency that suggested extensive military training and combat experience. Her activities were not defensive reactions to immediate threats, but deliberate offensive operations designed to eliminate hostile forces and neutralize threats to federal law enforcement operations. The detective's tactical radio carried fragmentary reports from federal surveillance teams that were attempting to coordinate with Rebecca while avoiding interference with her combat operations. Agent Martinez's coordination efforts were complicated by Rebecca's systematic destruction of criminal organization communication equipment, which was disrupting federal intelligence gathering while eliminating hostile command and control capabilities. Chen realized that Rebecca's apparent cooperation during police interviews had concealed not only her protected witness status, but active military service that had provided her with combat skills exceeding most federal agents and special operations personnel. Her vulnerable civilian persona had been perfect camouflage for someone whose true capabilities posed existential threats to criminal organizations and hostile intelligence services operating throughout the region. The sound of approaching helicopters added another layer of complexity to the tactical situation. As federal aviation assets established overhead surveillance while maintaining altitude sufficient to avoid ground-based threats, Chen could hear the distinctive rotor signatures of military aircraft that suggested deployment of specialized units with capabilities exceeding standard federal law enforcement resources. Rebecca's combat effectiveness was demonstrated by systematic elimination of criminal organization personnel who had been positioned throughout the warehouse district to coordinate her elimination and prevent federal extraction efforts. Forensic evidence from multiple engagement sites revealed precision shooting and tactical movement that indicated professional military training rather than conventional law enforcement experience. Agent Martinez's tactical updates revealed that Rebecca's offensive operations were providing federal forces with opportunities to identify and neutralize criminal organization assets that had been operating with apparent impunity throughout the Portland metropolitan area. Her combat activities were not only ensuring her personal survival, but were contributing to broader federal efforts to dismantle organized crime networks and eliminate threats to witness protection programs. The detectives' coordination of local law enforcement support included establishing secure perimeters that would prevent civilian casualties, while allowing federal tactical units to engage remaining criminal organization personnel. Chen understood that Rebecca's survival and successful extraction would preserve federal capabilities that were essential to ongoing operations against organized crime networks with connections to international terrorism and hostile nation-state activities. Chen's tactical assessment revealed that criminal organization forces were retreating from their original positions and attempting to establish defensive arrangements that would allow coordinated withdrawal from the engagement area. Their tactical communications indicated recognition that their elimination operation had failed catastrophically, with significant personnel losses and destruction of equipment that would take months to replace. The detective observed Rebecca's systematic pursuit of retreating criminal organization personnel, her tactical movements demonstrating familiarity with urban combat techniques that exceeded standard military training. Her ability to anticipate enemy movements and exploit tactical opportunities suggested someone with extensive combat experience in hostile environments where survival depended on superior skills and tactical awareness. Agent Martinez coordinated federal extraction procedures that would allow Rebecca to disengage from offensive operations and transition to protected custody under circumstances that would preserve her operational security and continued effectiveness. The federal agent's tactical planning included provisions for Rebecca's medical treatment and debriefing procedures that would gather intelligence about criminal organization capabilities while protecting classified information about her background and federal service. Chen's analysis of engagement patterns revealed that Rebecca had been conducting coordinated operations rather than random combat activities, her tactical choices reflecting strategic objectives that extended beyond immediate survival to include systematic degradation of criminal organization capabilities and intelligence gathering that would support future federal operations. The detective's understanding of Rebecca's capabilities was further enhanced by observation of her improvised weapons usage and tactical adaptations that demonstrated extraordinary resourcefulness and combat experience. She was utilizing available materials and environmental features to create tactical advantages that compensated for numerical disadvantages while maximizing her effectiveness against superior forces. Federal tactical communications revealed that Rebecca's combat operations had eliminated 17 criminal organization personnel, while destroying equipment worth millions of dollars and disrupting coordinated elimination efforts that had threatened multiple federal investigations and protected witness programs. Her individual effectiveness exceeded that of entire federal tactical units while operating with minimal support and improvised equipment. Agent Martinez's coordination of medical support included deployment of specialized trauma teams that were equipped to treat combat injuries while maintaining operational security protocols that would protect Rebecca's identity and federal service record. The medical arrangements reflected recognition that her injuries were consistent with extensive combat operations rather than simple self-defense activities. Chen's tactical coordination included establishing evidence collection procedures that would document criminal organization activities while protecting classified information about Rebecca's background and federal operations. The detective understood that forensic evidence from the engagement would support prosecution efforts while concealing operational details that could compromise ongoing federal investigations. The warehouse district's transformation into an urban combat zone had revealed infrastructure and personnel networks that supported criminal organization activities throughout the Pacific Northwest region. Rebecca's combat operations had exposed command structures, communication systems, and logistical arrangements that would provide federal authorities with actionable intelligence for systematic dismantlement of organized crime networks. Detective Chen's participation in the crisis had demonstrated the importance of local law enforcement support for federal operations, while maintaining professional discretion about classified activities that served national security interests. Her coordination efforts had contributed to successful resolution of threats that extended far beyond local criminal investigations to include protection of federal capabilities, essential to ongoing counterintelligence operations. Agent Martinez's final tactical briefing revealed that Rebecca's survival and combat effectiveness had preserved federal assets that were critical to operations against organized crime networks with connections to international terrorism and hostile intelligence services. Her apparent vulnerability during police interviews had concealed extraordinary capabilities that continued to serve federal investigations, while protecting national security interests that extended far beyond individual cases. The detectives' coordination of post-engagement activities included establishing secure transportation for Rebecca's extraction while maintaining operational security that would protect her continued federal service. Chen understood that Rebecca's cover identity had been compromised, but that her combat demonstration had revealed capabilities that would require new operational approaches and enhanced security arrangements. Federal debriefing procedures revealed that Rebecca's military background included special operations, service in classified theaters where she had developed combat skills and tactical expertise that exceeded conventional military training. Her transition to federal witness protection had provided cover for continued intelligence operations that served national security interests, while maintaining plausible civilian identity for operational security. Chen's analysis of Rebecca's combat performance revealed systematic application of advanced military tactics that indicated training and experience with elite units, specializing in counterterrorism and special operations activities. Her effectiveness during the Warehouse District engagement demonstrated capabilities that were normally associated with the most highly trained federal agents and military special operations personnel. The detective's understanding of federal witness protection programs was fundamentally altered by recognition that some protected individuals were active federal assets, whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities that served ongoing law enforcement and intelligence operations. Rebecca represented a category of federal service that required sacrificing authentic identity to maintain operational effectiveness in hostile environments. Agent Martinez's coordination of Rebecca's continued protection included arrangements for new cover identity and enhanced security measures that would account for her demonstrated combat capabilities while maintaining operational security for future federal service. The arrangements reflected recognition that her elimination of criminal organization personnel had revealed skills that would require different approaches to operational security and mission assignments. Chen's final report on the Warehouse District engagement emphasized Rebecca's cooperation and the intelligence value of her combat operations, while carefully concealing specific information about her military background and federal service record. The detective had learned that effective law enforcement sometimes required accepting incomplete information about assets whose full capabilities couldn't be disclosed for operational security reasons. The criminal organization systematic elimination during Rebecca's offensive operations had disrupted organized crime activities throughout the Pacific Northwest, while providing federal authorities with unprecedented intelligence about hostile networks and their operational capabilities. The engagement had demonstrated that individual federal assets with appropriate training and motivation could achieve strategic effects that exceeded the capabilities of conventional law enforcement responses. Detective Chen's coordination of evidence collection procedures focused on documenting criminal organization activities while protecting classified information about Rebecca's background in combat operations. The forensic evidence would support prosecution efforts against surviving criminal organization members, while preserving operational security for ongoing federal investigations that depended on maintaining Rebecca's cover status. The Warehouse District returned to normal industrial activities within 72 hours of the engagement, with no visible indication that it had been the site of combat operations that had eliminated a major criminal organization while preserving federal capabilities essential to national security operations. Rebecca's transition to new cover identity would allow continued federal service, while concealing the combat effectiveness that had been revealed during the crisis. Agent Martinez's assessment of the engagement's strategic implications revealed that Rebecca's combat operations had achieved objectives that would have required extensive federal resources and months of coordination to accomplish through conventional law enforcement approaches. Her individual effectiveness had demonstrated the value of protected assets, whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities that served ongoing federal operations. Chen's career continued with enhanced appreciation for the complexity of federal law enforcement operations and the importance of supporting classified activities while maintaining professional discretion about information that couldn't be fully disclosed. The detective had encountered someone whose apparent weakness had concealed strength that continued to serve national security interests through means that would remain forever classified. Rebecca's story represented the hidden sacrifices made by federal assets whose authentic identities had been surrendered to maintain operational effectiveness in hostile environments. Their apparent vulnerability provided perfect cover for extraordinary capabilities that served law enforcement and intelligence operations while protecting national security interests that extended far beyond individual cases or local investigations. The engagement's resolution demonstrated that effective federal service sometimes required individuals to sacrifice personal relationships, authentic identity, and normal life circumstances to maintain cover status that allowed continued operations against threats to national security. Rebecca's combat effectiveness had preserved not only her own life, but federal capabilities that protected American interests against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services. Detective Chen's understanding of modern law enforcement was transformed by recognition that apparent vulnerability could conceal extraordinary strength when properly utilized for operational purposes. Her encounter with Rebecca had revealed that the most dangerous people were often those who appeared most helpless, and that effective deception required hiding capabilities behind carefully constructed personas that served larger strategic objectives. Federal authorities' investment in Rebecca's protection and continued service reflected her value as an asset whose combat capabilities and intelligence contributions served ongoing operations against threats that extended far beyond local criminal activity. Her apparent civilian status provided operational security for activities that would continue to protect American interests while remaining invisible to public awareness or acknowledgement. The Warehouse District engagement had demonstrated principles of asymmetric warfare where individual assets with appropriate training and motivation could achieve strategic effects against superior numbers and resources. Rebecca's combat operations had validated federal investment in protected witness programs that concealed active service members whose capabilities exceeded conventional law enforcement and military personnel. Agent Martinez's coordination of Rebecca's transition to new operational assignments included enhanced security measures and modified mission parameters that would account for her demonstrated combat effectiveness while maintaining operational security for continued federal service. The arrangements reflected recognition that her elimination of criminal organization personnel had revealed capabilities that would influence future federal operations against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services. Chen's final assessment of the Rebecca Thompson case emphasized the importance of federal-local cooperation in addressing complex security threats, while maintaining professional discretion about classified activities that serve national security interests. The detective's encounter with Rebecca had provided lasting insights into the hidden infrastructure that supported federal operations while protecting individuals whose service required sacrificing authentic identity for operational effectiveness. Years later, Detective Chen would occasionally consider the implications of her encounter with Rebecca Thompson, understanding that effective federal service sometimes required individuals to appear vulnerable while possessing extraordinary capabilities that served ongoing operations against threats to national security. The engagement had demonstrated that apparent weakness could provide perfect camouflage for strength that continued to protect American interests through means that would never receive public recognition or acknowledgement. Rebecca's continued Federal service under new cover identity would allow her to maintain operational effectiveness while concealing the combat capabilities that had been revealed during the Warehouse District engagement. Her transition represented successful adaptation to changed circumstances while preserving federal assets that were essential to ongoing operations against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services that threatened American security interests. The detective's professional development was enhanced by recognition that modern law enforcement required coordination between multiple agencies while accepting operational limitations imposed by security requirements that served larger, strategic objectives. Chen had learned that individual contributions to federal operations sometimes required accepting incomplete information while supporting activities whose full significance wouldn't be immediately apparent or comprehensible. Agent Martinez's final briefing on the Rebecca Thompson case revealed that her combat operations had contributed to federal efforts that would influence law enforcement activities for years to come, demonstrating the strategic value of protected assets whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities. The engagement had validated federal investment in witness protection programs that served broader purposes than simple protection of civilian witnesses. Rebecca Thompson's story embodied principles of effective deception and operational security that were essential to federal service in hostile environments where survival depended on concealing true capabilities behind carefully constructed civilian personas. Her apparent fragility had provided perfect cover for combat effectiveness that continued to serve American interests, while maintaining operational security that protected both individual safety and broader federal operations. The Warehouse District would retain no permanent evidence of the engagement that had eliminated a major criminal organization while preserving federal capabilities essential to ongoing counterintelligence operations. Rebecca's transition to new cover identity represented successful completion of one phase of federal service, while maintaining effectiveness for future operations that would continue to protect national security interests through means that remained classified and unacknowledged. Detective Chen's encounter with Rebecca had provided professional insights that would influence her approach to future investigations while maintaining appropriate discretion about classified activities that served purposes beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. The experience had demonstrated that effective cooperation between federal and local authorities required accepting operational limitations while supporting activities whose strategic significance exceeded immediate comprehension or visibility. The resolution of Rebecca's crisis had preserved federal assets, whose continued service would protect American interests against threats that operated beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement responses. Her combat effectiveness had demonstrated that apparent vulnerability could conceal extraordinary strength when properly utilized for operational purposes, and that effective federal service sometimes required sacrificing authentic identity to maintain operational effectiveness in hostile environments where survival and mission success depended on perfect deception about true capabilities and background. The federal courthouse in downtown Portland buzzed with unusual activity as Detective Chen made her way through security checkpoints that had been reinforced with additional personnel and screening equipment. 6 months had passed since the Warehouse District engagement, and the ramifications of that night continued to ripple through law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. Chen carried a sealed briefing folder containing her testimony for the classified hearing that would determine the future of federal witness protection protocols and operational security measures. Agent Martinez greeted Chen in the secure briefing room located 3 floors below the courthouse's main level, his appearance reflecting the strain of months spent coordinating federal responses to security breaches that had threatened the integrity of multiple ongoing operations. The federal agents' briefing materials were spread across a conference table that had been swept for electronic surveillance devices and equipped with signal jamming equipment that would prevent unauthorized monitoring of their discussions. The hearing's primary focus involved evaluating systemic failures that had allowed criminal organizations to compromise federal witness protection operations while developing enhanced security measures that would prevent similar breaches in future cases. Chen's testimony would provide crucial insights into the intersection between local law enforcement capabilities and federal operational requirements, particularly regarding cases where protected witnesses possessed undisclosed combat capabilities. Rebecca Thompson's file remained classified at levels that exceeded Chen's security clearance, but Agent Martinez could confirm that her successful extraction and transition to new operational assignments had preserved federal assets critical to ongoing counterintelligence operations. The detective's professional discretion during the crisis had contributed to maintaining operational security while supporting federal activities that served broader national security interests. Chen's testimony began with detailed recounting of her initial interviews with Rebecca, emphasizing behavioral patterns and responses that had suggested capabilities exceeding her apparent civilian background. The detective's observations provided federal security specialists with insights into indicators that might identify other protected witnesses whose true backgrounds had been concealed for operational purposes. The hearing panel included representatives from multiple federal agencies whose operations had been affected by the security breaches that had compromised Rebecca's protected status. Their questions focused on procedural modifications that would enhance security while maintaining the operational flexibility needed for federal assets, whose service required deep cover identities and extended deployment in hostile environments. Detective Chen's analysis of the Warehouse District engagement provided tactical insights that would influence federal training programs and equipment, procurement decisions for protective details assigned to high-value assets. Her observations of Rebecca's combat effectiveness had revealed capabilities that exceeded standard federal agent training, suggesting the need for enhanced security measures when protecting individuals with military special operations backgrounds. The classified nature of Rebecca's continued federal service prevented detailed discussion of her current assignments, but Agent Martinez could confirm that her combat demonstration during the warehouse engagement had validated federal investment in witness protection programs that served purposes beyond simple civilian protection. The strategic value of assets whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities had been demonstrated conclusively through operational results that continued to influence federal law enforcement activities. Chen's recommendations for improving federal-local cooperation emphasized the importance of providing local law enforcement personnel with sufficient information to support federal operations while maintaining operational security for classified activities. The detective's experience had demonstrated that effective cooperation required balancing information sharing with security requirements that protected both individual assets and broader federal operations. The hearing's examination of systemic security failures revealed that criminal organizations had exploited weaknesses in federal information sharing protocols and personnel security procedures to identify and target protected witnesses whose testimony threatened their operations. The scope of the compromise had extended beyond individual cases to include broader intelligence about federal investigative priorities and operational capabilities. Federal internal security specialists presented evidence indicating that the Warehouse District engagement had eliminated criminal organization personnel whose activities had threatened multiple federal investigations and protected witness programs. Throughout the Pacific Northwest region, Rebecca's combat operations had achieved strategic effects that would influence organized crime activities for years while preserving federal capabilities essential to ongoing counterintelligence operations. Detective Chen's testimony concluded with recommendations for enhanced coordination protocols that would provide local law enforcement with necessary information while maintaining operational security for federal assets. whose effectiveness depended on concealed identities and capabilities. The detective's professional approach during the crisis had demonstrated that effective cooperation was possible when federal and local authorities maintained appropriate discretion about classified activities. Agent Martinez's final briefing revealed that Rebecca's transition to new operational assignments had been completed successfully, with enhanced security measures that accounted for her demonstrated combat capabilities while maintaining effectiveness for continued federal service. The arrangements reflected lessons learned from the Warehouse District engagement, while preserving assets that were critical to ongoing operations against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services. The federal courthouse is secure. Communication Center processed Chen's classified testimony for distribution to agencies, whose operations would be influenced by recommendations emerging from the hearing. The detective's insights would contribute to policy modifications that would enhance federal witness protection while maintaining operational security for assets whose service required concealed identities and extraordinary capabilities. Chen's return to regular duties with the Portland Police Bureau was accompanied by enhanced security clearances that reflected her demonstrated reliability during classified operations and her understanding of federal operational requirements. The detective's career trajectory had been permanently altered by her encounter with Rebecca Thompson, leading to assignments that would require continued coordination with federal authorities on cases involving national security interests. The Warehouse District had returned to normal industrial activities, with no visible indication of the combat operations that had eliminated a major criminal organization while preserving federal capabilities essential to ongoing law enforcement efforts. The area's transformation back to routine commercial activity demonstrated the effectiveness of federal security protocols that concealed operational activities while maintaining public safety and confidence in law enforcement capabilities. Detective Chen's professional development included specialized training in federal cooperation protocols and security procedures that would enhance her ability to support classified operations, while maintaining appropriate discretion about activities that served national security interests. The training reflected recognition that modern law enforcement required coordination between multiple agencies, whose activities often involved classified information and operational security requirements. Agent Martinez's assignment to new duties with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Counterintelligence Division reflected his successful coordination of operations that had preserved critical federal assets, while eliminating threats to witness protection programs. His experience with the Rebecca Thompson case had provided insights that would influence federal security protocols and operational procedures for protecting high-value assets whose service required deep cover identities. The criminal organization's systematic elimination during the Warehouse District engagement had created opportunities for federal authorities to dismantle related networks that had been operating throughout the Pacific Northwest region. Intelligence gathered during Rebecca's combat operations had provided actionable information that supported dozens of federal investigations, while disrupting organized crime activities that had threatened multiple communities and federal operations. Chen's enhanced understanding of federal witness protection programs included recognition that some protected individuals were active federal assets whose apparent civilian status concealed ongoing service in counterintelligence and special operations activities. This knowledge would influence her approach to future cases involving federal coordination, while maintaining professional discretion about classified activities that served broader strategic objectives. The detective's final report on the Rebecca Thompson case was classified and sealed, protecting operational information that could compromise ongoing federal investigations, while preserving intelligence that would inform future law enforcement efforts. Chen's documentation had provided federal authorities with tactical and procedural insights that would enhance security for protected witnesses while maintaining operational effectiveness for assets whose service required concealed capabilities. Federal authorities' assessment of the Warehouse District engagement revealed that Rebecca's individual combat effectiveness had achieved strategic objectives that would have required extensive federal resources and months of coordination to accomplish through conventional law enforcement approaches. Her demonstration of concealed capabilities had validated federal investment in witness protection programs that served purposes beyond simple civilian protection. Detective Chen's coordination role during the crisis had demonstrated the importance of local law enforcement support for federal operations, while maintaining professional boundaries that protected classified information and operational security. Her experience had provided insights into the complexity of modern law enforcement cooperation and the importance of supporting activities whose full significance often remained invisible to individual participants. The successful resolution of Rebecca's crisis had preserved federal capabilities that continued to protect American interests against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services operating throughout the region and beyond. Her transition to new operational assignments had maintained federal assets that were essential to ongoing counterintelligence operations, while demonstrating the effectiveness of witness protection programs that concealed active service members. Agent Martinez's final assessment emphasized that Rebecca's apparent vulnerability during initial police interviews had provided perfect operational security for someone whose true capabilities posed existential threats to criminal organizations and hostile intelligence services. Her demonstration of concealed strength had validated federal approaches to deep cover operations while preserving assets that continued to serve national security interests. Chen's professional reputation was enhanced by her demonstrated reliability during classified operations and her understanding of federal operational requirements that extended beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. The detective's discretion and competence had contributed to successful federal operations, while maintaining appropriate boundaries between federal and local authority that protected both operational security and professional relationships. The Warehouse District engagement had become a classified case study used in federal training programs to demonstrate principles of asymmetric operations and the strategic value of assets, whose apparent weakness concealed extraordinary capabilities. Rebecca's combat effectiveness had provided federal authorities with tactical insights that would influence future operations, while validating investment in programs that supported deep cover personnel. Detective Chen's encounter with Rebecca Thompson had provided professional insights that would influence her career, while demonstrating the importance of supporting federal activities that served national security interests beyond local law enforcement scope. The experience had revealed layers of federal operations that required local cooperation, while maintaining operational security for activities whose strategic significance often exceeded immediate comprehension. Years later, Chen would understand that her brief intersection with Rebecca's federal service had contributed to operations that continued to protect American interests through means that would never receive public acknowledgement or recognition. The detective's professional discretion had supported activities whose success depended on maintaining the secrecy that allowed federal assets to operate effectively in hostile environments where survival required perfect deception about true capabilities and background. The federal courthouse's secure archives contained documentation of the hearing that had resulted in enhanced security protocols for witness protection programs, while preserving operational capabilities that served ongoing counterintelligence operations. Chen's testimony had contributed to policy modifications that would protect future federal assets while maintaining the operational security that allowed continued service against threats to national security. Rebecca Thompson's federal service continued under enhanced security arrangements that accounted for her demonstrated combat capabilities while maintaining effectiveness for assignments that required concealed identity and extraordinary skills. Her transition represented successful adaptation to operational realities, while preserving assets that were critical to federal law enforcement and intelligence operations that protected American interests against persistent threats. The detectives' understanding of modern law enforcement had been transformed by recognition that apparent vulnerability could provide perfect cover for strength that served strategic objectives, requiring perfect deception and operational security. Chen's encounter with Rebecca had demonstrated that the most effective federal service sometimes required individuals to sacrifice authentic identity while maintaining personas that concealed extraordinary capabilities from hostile observation. Federal investment in Rebecca's continued protection and operational assignments reflected her strategic value as an asset whose combat effectiveness and intelligence contributions served ongoing operations against threats that operated beyond conventional law enforcement reach. Her apparent civilian status would continue to provide operational security for activities that protected American interests while remaining invisible to public awareness or official acknowledgement of her extraordinary service and sacrifice. 3 years after the Warehouse District engagement, Detective Chen sat in her newly appointed office at the FBI's Portland field office, reviewing intelligence reports that bore striking similarities to the Rebecca Thompson case. Her promotion to supervisory special agent had come with responsibilities that extended far beyond her previous role with the Portland Police Bureau, including oversight of federal-local cooperation initiatives and security protocols for protected witness programs throughout the Pacific Northwest region. The morning briefing materials spread across Chen's desk contained photographs and surveillance reports documenting suspected criminal organization activities that appeared to be testing federal witness protection security measures. Intelligence analysts had identified patterns suggesting that hostile organizations were attempting to identify and eliminate federal assets, whose apparent civilian status concealed ongoing intelligence operations and special capabilities that threatened organized crime networks. Agent Martinez, now serving as Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Operations, had requested Chen's assessment of these emerging threats based on her unique experience with cases involving protected witnesses whose true backgrounds had been concealed for operational security purposes. The intelligence community's growing recognition of asymmetric threats posed by criminal organizations with sophisticated counter-surveillance capabilities had elevated the strategic importance of protecting federal assets whose effectiveness depended on maintaining perfect cover identities. Chen's analysis of the intelligence reports revealed tactical signatures that indicated criminal organizations were employing enhanced surveillance techniques and personnel with military or intelligence backgrounds to identify federal operations and protected witnesses. The adversaries had adapted their methods based on lessons learned from previous encounters with federal assets, developing capabilities that posed serious threats to operational security and personnel safety. The detective's transition to federal service had provided her with access to classified information about the broader scope of witness protection programs that served purposes beyond simple civilian protection. Chen had learned the federal government maintained extensive networks of active service members whose apparent civilian identities concealed ongoing intelligence operations, counter-terrorism activities, and special operations that protected national security interests against persistent threats. Rebecca Thompson's file remained classified at levels that exceeded Chen's enhanced security clearance, but periodic operational updates confirmed that her federal service continued under circumstances that required constant vigilance and adaptive security measures. The strategic value of assets whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities had been validated through operational results that influenced federal law enforcement activities across multiple jurisdictions and international boundaries. Chen's responsibilities included developing enhanced training programs for federal agents and local law enforcement personnel who might encounter protected witnesses whose backgrounds had been concealed for operational purposes. The training emphasized recognition of behavioral indicators and security protocols that would protect both federal assets and supporting personnel while maintaining operational effectiveness for ongoing intelligence operations. The intelligence community's investment in protecting federal assets, whose service required concealed identities, had expanded significantly following the Warehouse District engagement and similar incidents that had demonstrated the strategic value of individuals whose apparent weakness provided perfect cover for extraordinary capabilities. Federal budgets now included substantial allocations for enhanced security measures and operational support that would maintain effectiveness, while protecting personnel whose exposure would compromise multiple ongoing operations. Agent Martinez's briefing on emerging threats included intelligence indicating that hostile organizations were coordinating internationally to share information about federal operational procedures and protected witness programs. The scope of the threat had evolved beyond local criminal activity to include systematic efforts by organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services to identify and eliminate federal assets whose effectiveness posed strategic threats to their operations. Chen's analysis of these developments revealed that criminal organizations had developed sophisticated understanding of federal witness protection procedures and were exploiting weaknesses in security protocols to identify and target protected individuals whose testimony or ongoing service threatened their activities. The adversaries' enhanced capabilities required corresponding improvements in federal security measures and operational procedures that would maintain protection while preserving operational effectiveness. The Portland field office had become a center for developing innovative approaches to protecting federal assets, whose service required deep cover identities and extended deployment in hostile environments. Chen's experience with the Rebecca Thompson case had provided insights that were being applied to security protocols and operational procedures that would influence federal law enforcement activities throughout the region and beyond. Federal training facilities had incorporated lessons learned from the Warehouse District, engagement into curriculum that prepared agents and supporting personnel for encounters with protected witnesses, whose apparent civilian status concealed military special operations backgrounds or intelligence capabilities. The training emphasized the importance of maintaining operational security while providing appropriate support for assets, whose effectiveness depended on concealed identities and extraordinary skills. Chen's coordination with international law enforcement agencies had revealed that similar threats to protected witness programs existed throughout the global intelligence community, with criminal organizations and hostile intelligence services sharing information and coordinating efforts to identify and eliminate federal assets, whose service posed strategic threats to their operations. The international scope of these threats required enhanced cooperation and information sharing between friendly intelligence services. The detective's professional development included specialized training in counterintelligence operations and security procedures that would enhance her ability to identify and neutralize threats to federal assets whose service required perfect operational security. Her enhanced capabilities reflected recognition that modern law enforcement required understanding of threats that operated beyond conventional criminal activity to include systematic efforts to compromise federal operations and eliminate protected personnel. Agent Martinez's coordination of regional security initiatives included deployment of enhanced surveillance capabilities and protective measures that would detect and prevent criminal organization efforts to identify and target federal assets. The resources being deployed reflected the strategic importance of maintaining operational security for personnel whose exposure would compromise multiple ongoing investigations and intelligence operations. Chen's assessment of current threat levels indicated that criminal organizations had achieved capabilities that pose serious challenges to traditional witness protection approaches, requiring innovative security measures and operational procedures. that would maintain protection while preserving the effectiveness of federal assets, whose service depended on concealed identities and extraordinary capabilities. The intelligence community's recognition of these challenges had led to substantial investment in research and development of enhanced security technologies and procedures that would protect federal assets while maintaining their operational effectiveness in increasingly hostile environments. Chen's insights from the Rebecca Thompson case were contributing to these development efforts while informing policy decisions that would influence federal operations for years to come. Federal authorities' assessment of the strategic landscape revealed that threats to protected witness programs represented broader challenges to national security that required coordinated responses involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The Warehouse District engagement had demonstrated that individual federal assets could achieve strategic effects against superior forces, but also revealed that adversaries were adapting their capabilities to neutralize these advantages. Chen's responsibilities for developing enhanced cooperation protocols between federal agencies and local law enforcement included creating procedures that would provide necessary operational support while maintaining security for classified activities that served national security interests. Her experience had demonstrated that effective cooperation required balancing information sharing with security requirements that protected both individual assets and broader federal operations. The Portland Field Office's Secure Communication Center processed intelligence reports that confirmed ongoing threats to federal assets throughout the region, with criminal organizations maintaining active efforts to identify and eliminate protected witnesses whose testimony or continued service threatened their operations. The persistent nature of these threats required constant vigilance and adaptive security measures that would maintain protection while preserving operational effectiveness. Agent Martinez's final assessment of current threat levels emphasized that adversaries had developed systematic approaches to compromising federal witness protection programs that pose strategic challenges to law enforcement and intelligence operations. The Warehouse District engagement had provided tactical victories, but the broader conflict required sustained effort and continued innovation in security measures and operational procedures. Chen's coordination of multi-agency responses to emerging threats included developing enhanced intelligence sharing protocols that would provide early warning of criminal organization activities while maintaining operational security for federal assets whose effectiveness depended on concealed identities. The procedures reflected lessons learned from previous security breaches, while incorporating innovative approaches to protecting personnel whose service required perfect deception about their true capabilities. The federal government's investment in protecting assets whose apparent vulnerability concealed extraordinary capabilities had expanded to include comprehensive programs that supported personnel throughout their careers while maintaining the operational security necessary for continued effectiveness in hostile environments. Chen's insights from the Rebecca Thompson case were contributing to these programs while informing policy decisions that would influence federal operations across multiple jurisdictions. Years of experience had taught Chen that modern law enforcement required understanding that apparent weakness could provide perfect cover for strength that served strategic objectives beyond immediate comprehension. Her encounter with Rebecca had demonstrated principles that continued to influence federal operations while protecting assets whose service required sacrificing authentic identity to maintain operational effectiveness against persistent threats to national security. The intelligence community's recognition of these principles had led to enhanced investment in programs that supported federal assets whose effectiveness depended on maintaining perfect deception about their true capabilities while operating in increasingly sophisticated threat environments. Chen's professional development had been shaped by understanding that effective federal service sometimes required accepting operational limitations while supporting activities whose strategic significance often remained invisible to individual participants. Federal authorities continued protection of assets whose service required concealed identities represented. Acknowledgement that national security interests often depended on individuals whose apparent civilian status concealed ongoing intelligence. Operations and special capabilities that protected American interests against persistent threats. The Warehouse District engagement had validated federal investment in these programs, while demonstrating the strategic value of personnel whose effectiveness required perfect operational security. Chen's final assessment of the Rebecca Thompson case emphasized that apparent vulnerability could conceal extraordinary strength when properly utilized for operational purposes, and that effective federal service sometimes required individuals to sacrifice authentic identity while maintaining personas that served strategic objectives beyond immediate visibility or comprehension. The principles demonstrated through Rebecca's service continued to influence federal operations while protecting assets whose contributions to national security would never receive public recognition or acknowledgement. The Portland field offices. Continued coordination of regional security initiatives reflected ongoing commitment to protecting federal assets, whose service required perfect operational security while maintaining effectiveness against threats that operated beyond conventional law enforcement reach. Chen's experience had provided insights that would continue to influence federal operations while demonstrating that sometimes the most dangerous people were those who appeared most vulnerable, and that effective deception required hiding extraordinary capabilities behind carefully constructed civilian personas that served larger strategic purposes. Agent Martinez's transition to higher levels of federal service had been facilitated by his successful coordination of operations that preserved critical assets while eliminating threats to witness protection programs. His experience with cases involving protected witnesses whose apparent civilian status concealed ongoing intelligence operations had provided insights that continued to influence federal security protocols and operational procedures for protecting high-value personnel whose effectiveness depended on concealed identities and extraordinary capabilities. The Warehouse District's return to normal industrial activities had concealed the strategic significance of combat operations that had eliminated major criminal organization threats while preserving federal capabilities essential to ongoing law enforcement efforts. The area's transformation demonstrated the effectiveness of federal security protocols that maintained public confidence while protecting operational activities that served national security interests through means that remained invisible to public awareness or official acknowledgement. Chen's understanding of federal witness protection programs had evolved to encompass recognition that these operations served strategic purposes that extended far beyond individual cases to include protection of assets whose ongoing service was essential to national security operations against persistent threats. Her professional development had been shaped by appreciation for the complexity of modern federal law enforcement and the importance of supporting classified activities while maintaining appropriate discretion about operational details that served larger strategic objectives. The successful resolution of threats to Rebecca's continued federal service had preserved capabilities that continued to protect American interests through means that would never receive public recognition while demonstrating the strategic value of assets whose apparent vulnerability provided perfect cover for extraordinary strength that served ongoing operations against organized crime networks and hostile intelligence services that threatened national security interests across multiple jurisdictions and international boundaries. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.